Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Dr. Simeon Hein. First, be sure to check out the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana, available on Tubi, Roku channel, multiple streaming platforms. Also, get a Rokfin premium membership at rokfin.com/FKN Plus, and be sure to download our podcast episodes directly through Spreaker. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Dr. Simeon Hein. He is a former university professor in statistics and research methods. He believes there is a large area of scientific knowledge that is being withheld from public discussion. Subsequently, he established the nonprofit Institute for Resonance and began teaching remote viewing classes in Boulder, Colorado, and continues to teach online. He also became interested in topics of crop circles, unexplained aerial phenomena, extraterrestrials, and Bigfoot. Dr. Simeon, welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, Chris. How's it going today?
It's going great. It's great to have you back as well.
Thanks.
Looking forward to discussing your book, Black Swan Ghosts. This investigates how our society treats witnesses to unexplained or paranormal events, UFOs, and even encounters with non-human intelligences. And it also explores why our society is at times reluctant to have serious discussions about the phenomena. But I sense this may be starting to change a little as we start to understand this a little bit more. And you also interviewed very credible experiencers for this book, so I can't wait to hear more about it. Before we do, it's been a while since you've been on. Just remind the audience a little bit about yourself and your work.
Oh, well, thanks a lot. Yeah. So my background is as a sociologist, statistics, and social research methods teacher. And I always felt there was something missing in formal official science, just even within academics. I felt that the methods, the focus was a little too much on linear correlations and not enough on other types of relationships. We know about fractal geometry, chaos theory. It was a little too focused to the linear and the ordinary, and it wasn't paying enough attention to things that might be at the edge of our attention. And this is before I got involved with these subjects. So then when I heard about remote viewing in 1996, it clicked a little bell in my head that said this might be one of those topics that I had thought might have been glossed over by science. And it turned out it was just the tip of the iceberg for a lot of different topics. And it allowed me to meet witnesses and people who came to these classes, people who had worked in the government, people who had worked in intelligence agencies. And I found that there was a much bigger story of our reality than we had been taught.
Were there any specific events or information that led you from going from these traditional scientific understandings to looking more into the paranormal and UFOs?
I think so. Once you get involved with something like remote viewing, and this is the ability that people have to perceive non-local information without using their physical senses. When you start going in that direction, and I'm not going to say, like a lot of people say, going down the rabbit hole. It isn't the rabbit hole we're talking about. We're going up to the sky. We're going to reality. This is how reality works, is that there are interconnections between things that your eyes don't see. You can't see the quantum level of reality. You're seeing physical Newtonian reality. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not the entire picture, and that's what the data show us. So once you get involved with these topics, it leads you to other topics with similar properties. For me, it led me to looking into crop circles, which is another type of resonance based on shapes, just because it was one of the targets we viewed in one of the RV classes when I took my training. I didn't know what they were in 96. I've been in graduate school for 7 years. I never heard of a thing called a crop circle. But you start looking into these topics, then around the crop circles, you talk to UFO witnesses. You talk to people that have seen objects hovering over these formations. Ball lightning came up early on in the crop circle topics. Orbs. I didn't know what those were, but people had seen them. Eventually, you see them yourself if you hang out long enough in those fields over in the UK. And then there were anomalous battery camera electronics failure activity, which was extremely puzzling. I assembled electronic kits as a kid. They never just melted or just stopped working just without any reason. But you go into these crop circles, you'd get those effects. But then you did more research, you'd see this happened around UFO witnesses too. And so these topics all connect all the way to cryptids and Bigfoot because people in my RV classes in Boulder, natives of Colorado, started telling me about their Bigfoot sightings out in the Rockies, which, I mean, again, back in 97 when I started teaching there, I just thought this was a rare primate, some sort of, escaped gorillas, just something really rare, a very rare animal. It didn't turn out to be that way. So, Chris, these topics can, if you have an open mind and you're willing to look at the data and not fence yourself in, one topic leads to the next. You know what it's like? It's like a dam breaking with one little brick missing, and it starts a little trickle, and the trickle becomes a bigger stream, and eventually the whole thing falls down. That is what happened to me. That's what happened to me.
Right on. Great explanation. Now let's get a synopsis of Black Swan Ghost. First of all, what brought you to write this book, and what does the title mean to you?
Well, the title and the synopsis comes from having met a lot of UFO ET witnesses just in remote viewing classes, and very credible people that had worked with NASA and other agencies. And you begin to hear the stories, and they begin to overlap, and you realize these people are telling you the truth. It's another aspect of reality that has received very little attention until a couple of years ago when New York Times came out with that article in 2017. But when I wrote Black Swan Ghost, that article hadn't come out yet. So here I am hearing story after story from credible witnesses, people with security clearances, things that they may not even want you to repeat. And I'm talking crash retrievals. I mean, and this is astounding stuff. Does anyone ever tell us this anywhere in our schooling or anything? You talking to these people, and they're people that have had careers, in the government and things like this. So that's really how it started, getting interested in the topic. And I realized, I just happened to have the book here. I didn't plan it this way, but there was this book written by Nassim Taleb called The Black Swan. The impact of the highly improbable. And what this book is about is how society underestimates improbable events. Things can happen that nobody's thinking about. It's not on anyone's radar. And we're talking about maybe some sort of meteor impact or some sort of really strong economic crash. And we saw that in our lifetime in 2007 and 8, when interlocking bank arrangements, deals, and one bank goes under, kind of like the dominoes I'm talking about, and your perception of the dam is your perception of, well, that happened to our banking system in 2007, 2008, and the whole thing had to be rescued over a weekend by the federal government. And I started thinking that UFO topics are like this in some ways because we don't talk about it. If we talked about it, perhaps the transition to understanding whatever this phenomena is would be maybe a little smoother, a little more gradual. But it's like if you push something back too far away, it's just going to keep coming back to you. And we have a name for this, by the way, in sociology: hidden events. And this comes from the work of sociologist Ron Westrom, who from Eastern Michigan University, who looked at subjects like child abuse and things like that in the 60s before anyone was talking about it because it was just considered so controversial and doctors didn't want to accuse parents. You can imagine the mentality in the 50s, what society was like back then. And so it dawned on me, if I'm just a person, I mean, I'm involved in these topics, but if I'm hearing all these stories and I'm not really looking for them, it's not like I'm soliciting stories, but if I'm coming across these very credible witnesses, there must be a lot more out there just from, you're intuiting how many, from the number of people you've come across, how many other people are out there who've had contact with this phenomena in one way or another, whether it's something that just someone has seen, something that landed. I have stories like that in Black Swan Ghosts. We're talking about craft that are landing near people. Occupants are getting out. And yet, what are they told by the police when they go to report this? What you saw was a weather balloon. You saw flocks of geese. You're hallucinating or something. It's a total denial of the reality. And so it occurred to me the same way Nassim Taleb was writing about the impact of highly improbable events leading to, collapses and catastrophes and things like this. This could happen to our society as well if this information is highly explosive as it could be. When we do find out the truth about this, Chris, which I think we'll find out in our lifetimes here, it could be a totally different reality than we were taught in school. We could be around a lot of other types of intelligent life. And that could cause like a collapse of our consciousness, of our sense of reality. And that's why I call it Black Swan Ghost. It's like Black Swan events, but it's ghostly because we can hypothesize about banking collapses and meteor impacts. But the idea that there could be humanoids walking around right outside your door that you thought were people, or maybe they're invisible, whatever form they take, that is even a bigger Black Swan event because it's not even something we talk about. So that's why I called the book, and I did revise it recently. That's why it's a second edition now with new cases and new stories, because you keep running across people like this. It's a little bit like honey. The more people you talk to, the more the other bees see that you're open to stories, and they begin to share their stories with you too. Excellent. So it's something that has its own momentum. It's absolutely fascinating. And just as a sociologist, not even as a physicist or something, just the fact that people have these stories and they may share them with you, but they're so reluctant often to want to get it on tape or on paper. Sometimes it's their parents that worked in the Air Force. It's absolutely fascinating. Absolutely.
It is, yes. And I think this is so important because, in my perspective, these experiences that individuals experience are some of the most important evidence that we could uncover about this phenomena. And I love that you are interviewing people who have had these experiences, especially high-level individuals, credible individuals. Now, before we get into your understanding about the possibilities of what is happening here beyond our perception, can you tell us maybe a couple of the most profound encounters that you wrote about, without giving away too much from the book, but maybe a little bit about some of the most interesting stories that you've heard?
Yeah, they're just there's so many of them. I mean, in the book, one of them was a friend of mine who was a pilot for a commercial airline, had been in the Air Force. And one day he said they're flying on an international route to Japan. And the co-pilot says, I had this really strange experience back in the 60s when we were flying B-52s right at the border of the Soviet Union with Turkey. He said we were up there in these formations. It was during one of the Arab-Israeli wars, which we see happening again right now, unfortunately. This was 1967. And what stuck out to me is what you'll hear is that these B-52s were flying in a convoy of four at a time, in a row, just to send messages to the Soviets. Don't mess around here. Don't, use any nuclear weapons or anything. And they're armed with nuclear missiles. And the co-pilot said that these objects came down from space at a 45-degree angle and circled around the whole formation of B-52s. And as they looped around, all the electronics went on the fritz. The radio guy in the back said, we're being scanned on all frequencies. This is not Star Trek. This is literally what the guy said to the pilot. We're being scanned on all frequencies. They lost communications. The objects circled around the whole convoy formation, go back up into space from the direction they came in, little discs. And the pilot had a camera, a new camera from his wife from last Christmas. So he took some photos. He radios the base. I'm not sure where they took off from, but when they land, there are guys waiting there on the tarmac saying, "Give us the camera." And the guy said, "That's my wife's present from last." They said, "We'll give it back to you. We just want the film." They took the camera, they took the film. They told him not to talk about it. And even my friend was reluctant to share the story. It took a year. You don't realize these stories in Black Swan Ghosts. People don't say, "Oh, put this in your book." No, they tell it to you over a beer, or you're visiting their house, or and you say, "Can I put that in?" "Oh, no, that's secret. That I could get in trouble. That person get." So you work for a year or two with them. "Can I change your name?" You kind of bring it up again a year later. Eventually, I got permission to put it in. But yeah, so the camera's taken, film's taken, the guy's ticked off. What is that? What are we dealing with here? That is not our technology. They would give the camera back if it was our technology. That if they knew what it was, they wouldn't even really care that much about something like that. I mean, they might want to not have the photo shared, but you would get the feeling they knew. But in this case, it's just like they do know what it is. They know that we don't know what it is. They know what they don't know. And this is what you hear over and over again. We've heard this recently from David Grush, Lou Elizondo, his new book, Imminent, people that have worked in intelligence agencies, DOD. It's the same sort of thing. They have these experiences and they're told to sign NDAs. I think this pilot was told to sign an NDA that you're not going to talk about it. So when something gets to be that repressed, it's important. Another story that really sticks out is Peter Leather. He was a jockey for the Queen that we met at Beckhampton when there was a pub there where he used to hang out. He was someone in the crop circle area, and we would just start talking to him. And he always shared this story, and he finally let me videotape it. And by the way, the videos of these stories are on the blackswanghost.com website. I mean, for free. You can just listen to these people talking. You don't even need to buy the book. And Peter told us that he had been walking at 1 a.m. in Surrey with a friend carrying a big piece of metal artwork, and they see this thing coming over from the horizon, flashing every once in a while. Beneath fog is kind of forming around it. That often happens around UFOs from the cold temperatures that they create. And it actually lands. It settles down on the hilltop. They call them the Downs in the UK. And a door opens and some tall humanoid gets out in a skin-tight suit. It's carrying a red light in its right hand, which we've reproduced on the cover, by the way. And it's funny. I noticed, Chris, looking at your art in the back, my little alien on the cover is the same colors as your dog behind there.
Yeah,
if you'll note.
Yeah,
we're using the same color scheme, which is kind of interesting, the synchronicity there. But
yeah, I have to thank Johnny Larson. He's the artist that produced that for me.
Boy, that's so interesting. I mean, if the audience look at how similar that
is.
But
yeah.
So what ends up happening? This story goes on and on, but it's fascinating. So his friend starts to panic. The being's walking towards him, and Peter always had an interest in this subject. So he thought, well, I'm going to get to go on a UFO. He's excited. But the friend peed his pants, was panicking, and Peter started to panic as his friend, come on, we got to get out of here. So the being turns around, walks back up the hill, craft takes off, shoots off to the horizon again. They run down to the road. Some friends happen to come by in a car, just happens to be people they know. They get a ride to the police station. And Peter said in the 70s, there was a UFO reporting form in UK police stations. Go figure. So, wow. So they they fill out the report at 1, 2 a.m. And then the next day at work, the phone rings. And they say, Mr. Leather. And he goes, who are you? And they go, never mind who we are. About last night, what you saw was a weather balloon. Yeah. The old weather. I'm surprised they didn't say swamp gas.
Yeah.
And he said, who is it? He goes, never mind who we are. He goes, I didn't see no blankety blank weather balloon. And they said, Mr. Leather, if you know what you're good for, we won't talk about this. And they hung up. Then the next day, he gets a letter. He said back then mail took 5 days to get across town, but here a letter shows up in his mailbox at home. You've been invited to a UFO meeting, a UFO conference in Manchester. So he gets permission to go to this conference, which he goes in, and it's just in a room at the bottom of a pub in the basement. The guy, bartender, the pub owner says, I don't know about any conference, but there's a whole bunch of guys downstairs. He goes in and they're all wearing uniforms, some military insignia that he can't identify. And he said it was every nationality on the planet. Like every ethnic group was there, like a UN of UFOs. Huh. And he goes in and he goes, oh, is this the conference? I can't wait. What do you guys have to say? He goes, well, they said, we want to hear about your story, Mr. Leather. And they ask him about the whole encounter. Every blade of grass, according to Peter, every little thing that happened. And they said, can you sketch it for us? So he draws out the sketch of the disc and the field, 1 a.m. and this fog. And they say, Mr. Leather, what you saw was a weather balloon. And can we have your sketch, please? Thank you very much. Good day. And they ask him to leave. He's the only presenter at this conference. It was obviously, now I did find out, Chris, the UN had a classified UFO program in the 70s, and Peter might have encountered it. They may be in Europe. They're ready to go anywhere. They don't know what these are. They're trying to get information. So that's one of the stories that's just so fascinating. It just cracks you up. What you saw was a weather balloon. I saw a documentary recently where the exact same words came up. It was reading this book. Flying Saucer, Serious Business, excellent book by Frank Edwards from the 60s, quite a while ago. And there was some mention there when someone was, was talked to the Air Force or something, and they say, what you saw was a weather balloon. And I just couldn't help but crack up. I mean, this was the byline from intelligence agencies in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. Now, then it turned to swamp gas. And then more recently, there were other convenient explanations. Stress, pilot stress, ice crystals on the window, any other sort of BS they can invent to avoid talking about this. Anyway, those are just two of the stories. I'm happy to talk about more. At the end, we'll talk about some more because I added some new accounts in the recent updated edition from last July.
As far as this phenomena goes, one of the biggest hurdles that researchers face is the lack of physical evidence. Occasionally, you might hear of metamaterials or someone being implanted with some unknown devices, but it's very rare. And there are many researchers that are speculating that this phenomena may not even have physical attributes at all, that it may be some sort of consciousness, thought form, egregore type of experience that people are having. But there are also the reports, like you just said, where they have very seemingly physical, very real encounters. And it seems like some of these experiences, the person having the experience, their entire reality can be shifted and changed by whatever they're interacting with. And it seems like even their memories can be affected. It seems like their perception is being altered in some ways by some of these experiences. Do you think that this is a physical phenomena in a sense that it's occurring, but we just can't see what we're interacting with? Or is it something in our consciousness that can manifest in a physical way?
Right. I would say it's both. I mean, it has a non-physical component. John Ramirez, a former CIA, intelligence official who was on several podcasts and was told he was allowed to talk about this, talked about a non-physical form when these UFOs came into the atmosphere. They would see them from the keyhole satellites, which were sort of the premier U.S. satellites in the 70s, the keyhole system. Those were the ones that could read a license plate from way up there. Yeah. And he called them stealth plasma, as if they could shift to a non-ordinary form, an invisible form, something that was only visible in infrared, but you wouldn't see with your eye. So there is a non-physical component. But Chris, I think there's another explanation why we don't have physical pieces. It's so highly classified that it's seized. by somebody. Because, I mean, I have it right here in chapter 19, an aerospace engineer who told me he didn't care anymore what NDA he signed. He was going to tell me his story. I love people like this. Phil, I had met Phil around meetings in the Denver area. And he said, you know, at his aerospace company, they were given materials from NASA, JPL, something like this. There's a chain of custody for these items. And they were asked, they were told the people that made it went away. Can you figure out how it works? And he said, I can't, they couldn't figure it out. It was too far ahead. And that is one of the newer stories I have in here, was coming across a very well-known computer engineer who hasn't come publicly yet. So I haven't really, you know, shared his name without his permission, but he had the same story as Phil. He said an agency, somebody came to him. That's, I think, his word. Somebody came to him. I got the feeling, an organization with a couple people, and they said, can you figure out how this works? And he said it was 3 feet across and curved like a piece of a hull. He estimated the ship would have been 80 to 100 feet wide diameter based on the piece that he had, which was only 3 feet across. But that's a pretty big piece. We're not talking about something microscopic. We're talking about a big piece. He thought it might have been from the Roswell crash. It looked pretty old. But when he looked at the inside it, it had nanotechnology that he said was 1,000 years ahead of where we're at. And that's why it's classified. Because the US government does not want that type of technology getting into the hands of our adversaries. For obvious reasons.
Right. Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It totally makes sense. So, I mean, this has been reinforced recently by Lou Elizondo, doing interviews about his book Imminent, which I've listened to on audiobook. It's very informative. He can't say that much in the book because, as he said in an interview, if I talked about what you're asking me, I'd go to jail. So that gives us a hint, Chris. If someone asked him about crash retrievals, he said, I can't talk about it. It's that classified people who know about this, not people like me who hear about it through secondhand witnesses and rumors, people who've been in the programs, who've been read into these programs where they're allowed to look at the materials or at least see them on video or through photography or something like this. I have agreed not to talk about it. And I came across a third engineer recently who worked for just an ordinary Fortune 500 engineering company that we're all familiar with. And it was at the end of a talk, and he came up to me and said the exact same thing. His group was given some pieces of something. They said, we can't figure out how it works. Can you? And I said, what did he stopped? I said, okay, well, what was the talk around the water cooler? Is this foreign adversaries, technology, metamaterials from some, you know, China's good at, I read about Chinese research in metamaterials in Science magazine all the time. They're very well advanced in this topic. He wouldn't talk about it anymore. He just said, I signed an NDA with the federal government. I can't talk about it. I can't, if I said anything to you, I could be, you know, damaged by the federal government through lawsuits.
Wow.
He said, if I went to hide in the deepest forests of Siberia, they would find me.
Oh.
That's literally what I'm not talking anymore. He's just talking. And then he says, I should probably leave. It's better if we forget about this conversation. And he hadn't told me anything. He had told me nothing. It's just someone came to him with pieces. They couldn't figure it out. No secrets shared there. Do you see how it's a black swan ghost topic? Because there are people out there like this engineer and this computer engineer and Phil. Those are just three people I've met. I've run into others whose dads worked with these programs who told me the same story out at Area 51, attempting to reverse engineer these materials. So my feeling about it, I have no doubt, having talked to people and heard these stories, now Lou Elizondo, David Grush, Carl Nell, Admiral Tim Godelet, and others who've come forward in the past year or two, high-ranking military and intelligence folks who've also worked in the aerospace industries. they are saying the same thing to us, that there is a crash retrieval program that if they talked about it, they would go to jail, and that there are pieces and that it's farmed out to aerospace companies so that it's exempt from FOIA. We went to one of these aerospace companies, Bigelow Aerospace, as part of the SSE IRVA meetings, Society for Scientific Exploration and International Remote Viewing Association meetings in Vegas in 2018. Now, we didn't go to see the UFO materials. We went to see Bob Bigelow's modular space capsule components where they could assemble them in space and things for astronauts. And in the New York Times article from Leslie Kane et al., Blumenthal, Cooper, 2017, December, it said that Bigelow Aerospace is one of the companies that somebody told them this, that had the materials in a special airtight room, vacuum sealed room, somewhere on their facility. So I asked our guide about this, and they said, well, we don't comment on news articles, type of thing. And then I'm there, and I said this to someone who has experience with this, and he said, what did they say when you asked him? I said, they kind of made a joke. One guy said, oh, it's all around you in the walls here. He looked me straight in the eye. He said, I've been in the building. This is what this person said to me with the materials. So, okay, just use your imagination, Chris. This is highly classified subject matter. At the very minimum, because it could be weaponized by our adversaries and they could get a tremendous advantage over us like the Soviet Union had in 1957 with Sputnik. Remember the Sputnik moment? Yeah. So this is partly why it's so classified, in my view. And it might be a good reason. I'm not saying it shouldn't be if this is what the fear is. But so to answer your question, going back, I think the materials do exist. I think we saw some at the SSE IRVA meeting from Hal Puthoff, the bismuth magnesium samples that Art Bell had, which act like a metamaterial, and I think they modulate terahertz radiation and things. Metamaterials are materials that are engineered with very fine detail that allow them to act like waveguides. Man-made materials that act like waveguides, manufactured. And so I think the materials exist, Chris. I just think based on my experience, and I'm open to hearing anyone else who's talked to witnesses like this, that it is so highly classified, they're literally afraid of a jail sentence.
Well, it seems like the past few years that we have gotten more information out of our government, military, industrial complex, the media, about what could possibly be happening with UFOs. Why do you think now that this is being allowed, this information, as little as we get, is being allowed to be shared with us?
Well, it seems to be the work of a small group in the DoD, including Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and a few others that had worked in these programs called OSAP and ATIP, and whatever preceded those programs that we've heard about. Right. And they got really sick and tired of having this information repressed when they felt like there had to be more public discussion about it at some level. So they, based on our history in the past 15 years, it seems that those individuals really pushed for some disclosure, got release of the Tic Tac video from the Nimitz incident in 2004. And the other videos that were released. And once those videos were released, it was material for a New York Times article. So it's kind of like a dam breaking open, this analogy we're using. I mean, you had a couple insiders realize that the American people were being ripped off because it's a country based on open and free discussion. It has to be a transparent country. That's what the basis of a democracy is. A democratic republic is discussion, debate, ideas. We don't settle things here, just by taking over other countries. We don't settle it just with who has the biggest weapons. It's settled through law. And that means our legislature has to get involved. So that's what their idea was. If we get this out in the public, eventually Congress will hear about it. And so this is what's been going on, Chris. I'm told from people like Jay Stratton, who I got to talk with a year ago at the Phenomicon conference in Utah. And he said that the briefings had been going on ever since that New York Times article. You had people like Chuck Schumer from New York and other senators um, say, oh, wow, this really matters. And it's not just that they came out of nowhere. You had Harry Reid, senior senator, right, House Appropriations Committee, I believe, and Stevens and Inouye, three senators who had contact with this phenomenon. Stevens had seen it in World War II. Inouye, I believe Harry Reid had some contact with the phenomena. Maybe his family saw something in Nevada. They all said this matters. So we're going to push for hearings. So these hearings have been going on in a classified form in these so-called SCIFs, secure compartmentalized information facilities. I should mention one more thing that happened though. Back in 2013, this very briefly, the disclosure seemed to start in 2001 with Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. Mm-hmm. There was a one-day event at the National Press Club where a number of witnesses, very good, credible witnesses, came forward with the stories just like I'm telling you here.
Right.
Same sort of thing. That didn't really translate into much afterwards. But as you know, these things build up in the awareness of people, and researchers like myself always need more information to solidify the topic, to be able to explain it to the public. Then in 2013, there was a citizen hearing on disclosure, which I attended 5 days at the National Press Club again in DC. And that had 40 witnesses, 8 hours a day. They could not get any sitting senators or congresspeople to attend. So they hired retired senators and congresspeople. They got some flack for that, but hey, I mean, those people charge money for their time, retired congresspeople and senators, and they couldn't get any sitting ones. They said it would hurt their careers too much. In fact, Harry Reid, in his interviews, if you listen to him, he said he was told by his aides, this could hurt your chances for re-election if you get involved with this topic. And I remember his response. I can't remember the words, but I remember his, because that guy was a boxer. He was tough in his college days. And he said, I don't give a flying F of what it does. This matters. We're going to talk about it. And he didn't listen. Luckily, Harry Reid didn't. See, everyone's playing the popularity game. And it's especially true now with social media and YouTube. People want to get the most possible views. And the problem with that is it could come at the expense of telling the truth. And that's true in politics as well. So people like him, Harry said, I don't care what we're going to do what's right. I'm getting older anyway. I'm not going to be here forever. So luckily, Harry Reid came forward. So we had the citizen hearing. We had a retired Congressman, Merrill Cook from Utah, who I got to talk to at the hearing. It was a lot of great witnesses, militaries from around the world. We heard about some fantastic encounters. Lieutenant Colonel Oscar Santamaria from the Peruvian Air Force that, was ordered to chase this thing that could change elevations, do circles around his Soviet planes. Peru was allies with the Soviet Union back then, his Sukhoi plane. And he said he fired every round from his cannon into it, big slugs designed to take out a truck. And it bounced, it absorbed the shells. It absorbed the shells. It was like rubber, And imagine the material. I'm raising my hand here. Yeah. Imagine the impact having a material that can absorb huge shells like that. So those are the witnesses we heard. Now, I talked to Merrill Cook later, and he said he found it very convincing. He didn't know about this topic before. He was an open-minded person from Salt Lake City, and he said, I think it's a security concern for airplanes that could commercial aircraft. Now, this is before we knew that the military aircraft were encountering these, Nimitz incident, the East Coast incidents, Ryan Graves, all those folks. And I interviewed a lot of them for my YouTube channel, the Nimitz folks from the Princeton and the Nimitz, about their experience there. But we didn't know about that in 2013, even though the incident happened in 2004. We just knew about commercial close encounters, which could lead to damage and a fatal crash and so forth. So we had the citizen hearing. Merrill Cook later said he asked his other colleagues in Utah who were sitting senators and congresspeople, yes, some other politicians in Utah, in Congress, about it. And they said, yeah, we know this is real, but we wouldn't get reelected if we talked about it because our election money comes from special access programs who pay us not to talk about it. Aerospace contract. So you get the idea, Chris. There has been a history for 25 years now or so. It's been building. So another explanation beyond the individuals that pushed for these release of these videos in the New York Times article, I think it's just history. History absorbs truth, and you can't hide it forever. Eventually, the more you try to push it back, the more it tries to come out.
Well, do you think it has anything to do with our current level of access to technology that we can use ourselves to find some of these things, to video these things, and show our own evidence?
I think so. We're living in a time that didn't exist when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. Back then, all we had to transmit images were fax machines.
Yeah.
And then in high school, mainframe computers started to exist, and you would have a little terminal that would connect to some IBM computer somewhere for the computer club, and you would learn BASIC and the coding language back then. And you could see images on your black and white screen made up of characters from the keyboard. It was, yeah. So we've gone from that in my lifetime and Polaroid photos, which is the closest you got to instant replication of photos. You know, you had to drop your film off at a film place. There were these film places around. You drop off your little 110 little Instamatic film cartridge, and a couple of days later, maybe if you spent the money to rush the production, you could get it back the same day. You know, so that's all we have. But now the internet exists where this information, yes, I agree. It's very hard to, there's a lot of disinformation and false things online. You just look on Twitter, X, or anything, you see so much stuff, and then there's a little correction below it. No, this footage is from this. It's from a video game or whatever. It's not a real UFO. Yeah, and there's so much, but we can share information like we're doing right now, and it accelerates the ability for people to hear it. So I have been approached by people in coffee shops where I often hang out who've come up to me, who I've known for a while, who weren't interested in this topic. They go, Sim, is it real? You know, I heard this on Fox News. So, Chris, there are some people that if it's not on their news station, it won't be real until they see it on either Fox News or MSNBC, depending on your political persuasion, right? The day it shows, I have a friend who only listens to NPR. It's not real for her until Terry Gross talks about it on NPR. Right. Okay? It's how we are. I remember listening to NPR in my younger days as one of the main news sources. And I think I understand that if they weren't talking about it, well, you know, but now we know all these news sources are heavily controlled by sponsors and their censorship, and they don't want to offend the powers that be in the federal government. One more thing I'll say about this, Chris. Why we haven't heard about it is reporters and investigative journalists know that if they report on this topic and they offend one of the intelligence agencies or the Department of Defense, they're not going to get good leads for future stories. Your leads depend on you knowing people in the federal government who pick up the phone and call you or send you an email. Here's a story coming down. If you step on their toes, you won't get those stories. So everyone's playing the game. And this is why, going back to your original question at the beginning of the show, we don't know about this. Everyone's playing it safe right now. But sometimes playing it safe is the most dangerous thing you could do when there's a paradigm change.
Yeah, and there's so much information. Like you said, there's a lot of misinformation, but there is a lot of good information if you know where to look for it. Now, I want to get as deep as we can into your understanding of the phenomena as it relates to the light and dark experience, the duality, the negative experiences versus the transformative, beautiful experiences. I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of extraterrestrial experiencers, abductees throughout my career here, and there are some very profound crossovers and similarities and very profound differences between many of these experiences. But starting with the more negative, you have everything from experimentation, sexual encounters against your will, all sorts of horrifying experiences, a spectrum actually of experiences with a spectrum of different types of beings reported during these experiences. What do you think about the nature of the duality of this?
Well, it's obviously a very complex topic. We don't know exactly what we're dealing with. And if anybody does, they're not telling us. But, I mean, the truth about what this is going to be shocking in the biggest possible way. Because I've been hearing these stories, too, for quite a while, 30 years. One of them I wrote about, you're talking about sexual experiences. I mean, I wrote about this in Opening Minds. I really had to debate putting this in a book about crop circles remote viewing. But it was from a guy called Bob in the book who went back from Farsight. He was a railway engineer in Arizona. He went back from Farsight and had a couple experiences in his bedroom, one of which things showing up. And, you know, we warn people when you take RV, I mean, we have you sign a, you know, a non-liability form because anything, I mean, it starts opening up your perception. And he claimed to have had one of these experiences of a non-voluntary sexual encounter with a gray female who apparently said to him, we have trouble, you know, reproducing and we need help from human DNA. You've got what we need. And thank you. We're going to do it right here in your room. And, you know, and he said he didn't want to, but I mean, everything that needed to function properly functioned properly, magically. And he would not even tell me this story. Like he made me drive down to Tucson to pick up his typed notes, which I still have, his written notes. And it's so much detail in there. I mean, this guy, I just can't believe he had a mind of a fiction novelist about this encounter. But when I looked at other people's encounters, Chris, it was so similar to what is going on there? Why? Here's the thing we need to look at with this evidence. And you've experienced this too, because you've obviously talked to a lot of people. There are a lot of similarities between these encounters. And that suggests to me that it's real data, because it starts out as stories. This is what social scientists deal with. But let's say you hear the same thing over and over again. Eventually you'd come to the conclusion, yes, it's really happening. The fact that it's not on the news or most people don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not happening. I mean, my father's side of the family came from Nazi Germany, and they got out before they were put in concentration camps. And I talked to my grandmother about what it was like as these Nazi Nuremberg laws were slowly passed, making Jewish people second-class citizens, and eventually other people as well. And that's what she described to me, Chris, is it's spooky because your neighbors are like avoiding it because it's uncomfortable. Even if they're not Nazis themselves, they're passive spectators. They're sort of acquiescing. And so everyone's uncomfortable with this type of coercion, right? And so your neighbors stop talking to you and they stop making eye contact. Just gradually, we're talking over months as these laws are passed. So I had a feeling, even talking to my grandmother, what it's like when the majority of the society doesn't want to talk about what's going on. And if you had talked about concentration camps back then, people might not have believed you, right? You couldn't believe people were being murdered and then incinerated in crematoriums. It would be too like, what? If you weren't ready, if you hadn't been around. But as the news of this topic gets out, UFOs, the type of story we're talking about here, you hear more of these encounters and you begin to realize that these people believe this happened to them. Mm-hmm. That's their experience. So we need to investigate. Lou Elizondo talked about this in one of his interviews, and Terry Lovelace, you might have talked to, who wrote Incident at Devil's Den, told me to put this in my most recent book, Dark Matter Monsters, about cryptids, Bigfoot and so forth. I was talking to him about his encounter at Devil's Den just one day. And he said, I want you to put this in your book. He goes, I got a call from Department of Homeland Security about these abduction events from ETs. He said, and they said they were treating it seriously. So if they are, they're not telling us. But he goes, no, he said, I said to this guy, I didn't know the U.S. government had jurisdiction over ETs. And he said the guy didn't laugh on the other side of the phone. It was just silent. He thought, he was making a joke, can you tell extraterrestrials what to do with their level of technology? So yeah, so this is a big important component of it. So to go back to your question, there's a lot of different aspects of it. There's the physical side to it, which has physical correlates. We often have these temperature changes. Often it gets cold in the vicinity of these cases. It can get very quiet sometimes. People have time loss. Engines of cars stop. I just got a report from Stan Gordon. There used to be this belief that happened years ago before modern cars existed in their form with electronics. But no, I just got this report from 2 cars stalling on a highway in Pennsylvania. Stan Gordon is the researcher in Western Pennsylvania, studies UFOs, Bigfoot, stuff like this. Wrote that book called Silent Invasion about the Bigfoot UFO connection, right? So he just sent me, anyone can go to his website, of cars stalling when this strange craft is around. This has been going on a long time. And so what we know about this, Chris, is that until the news media take it seriously and our authority figures, I think for some people that could be their church or synagogue or mosque, wherever they go. Until the authority figures in people's lives tell them this is real, they won't go there. No matter how much evidence you show them, it has to reach this level of like a currency, like a monetary currency, but in idea form, if you know what I mean, where it seems real. And I think we're slowly getting there because people like our senators and congressmen or congresspeople are hearing these stories, I'm told, from witnesses, and some of them we've been told about, but it's classified, and they must be like up to here with it. Like, what are we dealing with here? So they're the ones pushing for this UAP legislation. And Schumer pushed most recently. He had this thing for eminent domain that all aerospace contractors have to give back their UFO pieces to the federal government within 180 days. That was opposed by people like Mike Turner from the Wright-Patterson area, where there's a lot of military defense contractors who didn't want, obviously, their UFO pieces having to go back to the federal government. So that was stripped out of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. But Schumer had something recently about a UAP Disclosure Act bill in the next NDAA for 2025, I think, and it was stripped out again. So as long as our legislators are stripping this out of legislation, when people like Chuck Schumer, now I grew up in New York, so to have Chuck Schumer involved in this topic is like as much of a parallel reality as legal marijuana is in many states, something I'd never thought I'd see in my lifetime. But Chuck Schumer, I always remember as being involved in social issues and environment, gun control. This is the Schumer I remember from my days growing up in New York, because he's been involved in politics since I was in high school. But now it's UFOs for him. That's telling you something. And I asked somebody, how did Chuck get involved with this? Someone from the East Coast who's not really, it's not his main topic. He's not on any of the defense committees or anything. At least he wasn't for a long time. But they said, well, he was Harry Reid's friend. He was big Harry Reid. They're 2 senior senators. And so he got it from Harry Reid. So, it goes along these underground channels and it makes its way, it appears in legislation. And then the legislators who have defense contractors as big donors in their districts do not want to upset the apple cart, because the secrecy still pays off for these. Apparently, Chris, I this is going to the edge of my knowledge, but apparently they want to develop this technology and use it in their products, which is what Colonel Corso told us. Remember, day after Roswell? Yeah, so I remember him. I never saw him present, but I saw Bill Burns, who produced the book, present about it. Maybe I did see Corso. Was he at one of those conferences? In any case, he said his job was to disperse the Roswell technologies to different companies. And he claimed, and we can't prove this, that's where the transistor came from, night vision, and other materials. he mentioned from the Roswell crash. So this is really what it comes down to, is the phenomena. Going back to your question again, it has a wide range of expression. But I don't believe until we have legislation that passes both the Senate and the Congress. And there are organizations now, nonprofits online, if you look it up, for UAP disclosure. Danny Sheehan's involved in one of those, where they have a lot of contact with Congress. Our society is based on legislation. We don't have any traditions that we all share apart from just a few basic values, but this country is totally based on this legislative framework, the whole federal framework, right? The states, and if it doesn't make it to that level, that's, I think, what we're talking about here. Whatever it is, black, dark, non-physical, sexual encounters, all this, people won't feel comfortable talking about it until there's legislation. And I think here's my idea how it would start. You give immunity to witnesses who've been in these special access programs, as Stephen Greer has been arguing, that those special access programs are illegal, as some people believe. At least Mellon and Elizondo have suggested it goes in that direction, where they're not accountable to anybody. And so therefore your NDA to that special access program is not legally binding. And we get these people in front of Congress. We had some last year. We had David Grush and Ryan Graves and Dave Fravor, and that's fine. But we need more of this. There's thousands of these people out there who've had contact with this within our own government, and other people who've had contact with it, credible people, and I think we need public hearings. I just think we need to tune in every day and hear witness, like I heard at the citizen hearing, but I want this, Chris, C-SPAN had cameras. They have cameras in the National Press Club. They can turn them on remotely, okay? They didn't turn them on at the citizen hearing for even a minute. You would think a 5-day event at the National Press Club with former senators and congresspeople and a lot of credible witnesses from the government, from military, you would turn it on to say there's a UFO hearing. I mean, we had a hearing in '68 under who was the president then? There was a UFO hearing in 1968. Gerald Ford was involved. And there was a 1-day hearing in front of Congress. I mean, there's some precedent for this. And so we did have 5 days of testimony. They could have turned the cameras on and showed it on C-SPAN, but no, they didn't. And so we had this hearing last year. Was it earlier this year? In front of that, was it the House's Intelligence Committee or something? We had Grush and Graves and Fravor. Well, that's a good start. But there's a lot more witnesses, and it should be organized. You've heard these congressional hearings when it goes on for days. I mean, they'll do this over computer security. Anytime they feel like it, they'll summon all the executives of Silicon Valley. You remember there were hearings over Apple, whether they should have to make their encryption accessible to law enforcement. Do you remember those hearings? Yeah. So they do it for these other terrestrial topics. You could devote, given the high level of some of these witnesses, they're where they're coming from within the federal government, classified programs. You would think, I'm not against having the classified side of it, but it needs to be echoed by a public-facing side, or we don't have a democratic republic anymore. It's something else.
I agree 100%.
I'll shut up.
No, that's all good. There seems to be a growing consensus amongst many modern researchers that this phenomena may not necessarily be coming from other planets in the galaxy, but may be surrounding us at all times, just beyond our perception, something more of different layers of reality, dimensions, if you will.
I think we don't know totally where it's coming from, and there are all these different ideas. I mean, there's the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. There's an assumption that we're the main inhabitants of the planet, humans. We certainly dominate the planet, sometimes in very negative ways. there are other animals here, but humans had this ability to band together, over thousands of years and develop language. And we worked together and ended up being the dominant animal on the planet, or so we think. But maybe we're not the dominant species on the planet. Maybe we just have this. Maybe ants think they're the dominant species on the planet from an ant point of view, from what they can see. There's a lot of other ants around. Just because we're on the surface of the planet doesn't mean that there's not other species around. And some of these species could be what we call extraterrestrials. Maybe they're not extraterrestrial. This is a discussion we have to have. We don't really know. I mean, it seems like there are extraterrestrial craft and so forth based on these witnesses, but we don't know for certain where they're coming from. Or let's say where all of them are coming. There could be parallel realities. In our own Earth, there could be places we don't know about, like oceans, deep oceans,
right,
where you would hide from people like us with our weapons.
We've got a few minutes left. I know you mentioned that there are some newer stories that you updated in the book. Maybe you could tell us a couple of those to close out with.
Yeah. I wanted to show you the drawing, by the way, of the engineer that I met, the computer engineer that described handling this 3-foot section of craft, drew out in the air. He drew sketch. I reproduced it. What these materials look like, these little thin wires that grew in thickness and thinness that he felt interacted directly with the quantum field. Wow. So that's in there. But one of the most interesting stories is it's chapter 26 now in the revised edition. This is my own high school coach, wrestling coach. I didn't take wrestling, but I knew kids in my class who took wrestling. The high school team had a sighting of a black triangle over a neighboring high school after a wrestling match. They were coming out of Mamaroneck High School in New York, Westchester, on a Saturday, and they all saw a black triangle hovering maybe a mile up over the gym. Not that high up. They said it was big. I didn't hear about this incident until a couple of years ago. A friend who knew Vinny talked about this. A friend of mine, Dominic, I've known since kindergarten. And he said there was a UFO sighting in our high school in 11th grade, 10th, 11th grade, something like this. I didn't hear about it recently, but the story was that Vinny saw this. Jets came and chased. It had lights on the tips, as typical. This is before the Hudson Valley Triangle became really a thing in the 80s. This is 79. Vinny said that jets came and chased it from the direction of Connecticut. Vietnam-era military jets, I think those would have been, it was F-89s or something like that. In the 79, whatever jets were around at those bases, and in Connecticut, Massachusetts, the thing took off at warp speed in the direction of New Jersey. The jets couldn't keep up with it. He calls the police. Vinny calls the police. They say, yes, we've had other reports of this object. And one of my classmates said it was the scariest thing he'd ever seen. Nobody talk about Black Swan ghost events. Nobody talked about it in that would have been 10th grade, I think, 10th or 11th grade. Nobody talked about it. I'm just finding out about 40 years later. I'm finding out it in 2020. I mean, how long does it take for stories to become surface to the level of truth? Now Dominic went to the library recently and found the newspaper articles about this triangle over Mamaroneck. Other people saw it. 2 different newspapers checked with the police. These are articles from 79. And the police said, yes, we had calls about it, and there were other planes. There are some slight discrepancies from Vinny's story, but I mean, isn't that kind of funny and amazing at the same time that your own high school class could have had a mass sighting, at least with the high school wrestling coach team, and no one said anything? And it even was in the newspapers at the time, and you still didn't hear about it. I mean, it's a daylight sighting. Everybody saw it. The police said other people saw it. And to boot, there was a blackout in that area at the same time. So, I mean, this often
I would hope
accompanies
in our
UFOs.
modern age things would be different. There does seem to be a more open-minded approach to this. We are in very interesting times when it comes to this.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Chris. And I just want to say, go to the Black Swan Ghosts website, blackswanghost.com. I'm happy to send people signed copies, which you can get from the site. But I would encourage you just to watch the videos. I have about 5 or 6, 7 videos of these witnesses, just like what I've told you here. You can listen to them in their own words, describing it, watch their body language. That's just fascinating of itself. There's people brave enough to come forward, say, Simeon, I know you study this. I want to tell you my story. So please go to the site to watch some of those videos. And thanks very much.
I love it. Thank you so much. We'll definitely be doing this again. Much more we can discuss. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow.